With the NBA lottery behind us, it is now officially mock draft season. And I get a chance to do a couple of these every year, both of the community variety over at Bluff City Media and Grizzly Bear Blues, as well as now as a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Our draft is approaching, and I have to answer the same question that Zach Kleiman and company have to answer. What to do with the number 25 pick? Do I keep it? Do I trade it out? I'm going to argue both sides on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much for being with me. No DeMichael to start the week. He'll be back with us tomorrow. But you got me to start your Monday off, hopefully on a positive note. Excited to be here with you, as always, here on Locked On Grizzlies. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Thank you for being an everydayer, hopefully, who checks us out either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. You like, you comment, you rate, review, subscribe, all of those wonderful things that help us continue to build Locked On Grizzlies. Now proudly well over 2,000 subscribers. This on YouTube, I should say. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks has the ability to give first-time users a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, I am fortunate here at Locked On Grizzlies to be tasked with being the mock GM of the Grizzlies entering the Locked On NBA mock draft. And as that process begins, and it's not really an actual process, right? My mindset is to watch film of prospects who I think make sense for the Memphis Grizzlies, and DeMichael and I will talk more about that in the episodes to come, the actual archetype, the skill set, the size, those sorts of things. That's not really the focus of this episode. This episode is going to do the macro view, the 30,000-foot view of the Memphis Grizzlies and the reality of the number 25 selection in the 2023 NBA draft. I think that it's a two-sided argument, and I do believe you could argue both sides, and I'm going to do my very best to do so right now, starting with the side of keeping the number 25 pick in the 2023 NBA draft. Because in my opinion, the easier argument is to ship it out. And maybe that's what I do. Maybe that's what I'm leaning towards in all of my mock draft endeavors. 'Tis the season. But I do think that it's important to make an argument that the replacement for Dillon Brooks could very well already be on the roster. And if Dillon Brooks' replacement is already on the roster, or you think you could select him at number 25 overall, then you maintain your flexibility in terms of resources and assets, and you make that pick. Now, with the new CBA going into effect, which is another thing that DeMichael and I will talk about in the future, collective bargaining agreement starting July 1, the Grizzlies are going to have additional slots, or an additional slot for a two-way contract. So 3 two-way contracts. That means the Grizzlies will have 2 of those available, assuming they keep Vince Williams under his current deal. The 2 second-round picks that the Memphis Grizzlies currently hold in the 2023 NBA draft could very easily be used for those contracts. So I do think that there is logic to holding on to the second-round selections and taking maybe a big and a combo guard or whatever the case might be. But whoever the wing is that is going to replace Dillon Brooks, if they're on the roster, if they're not on the roster, it probably needs to have something to do with the first round pick in 2023, number 25, whether it's via trade, which we'll talk more about here in a moment, or whether it's right now talking about potential players that could be drafted using that selection. And if you go to tankathon.com, which is my personal favorite, There are so many different places. CBS, The Ringer, ESPN, up and down the list. Wonderful sites that have great insights. They go all the way in on the draft. I like Tankathon for two reasons. One, it has a great name, Tankathon. And two, they do a wonderful job kind of outlining strengths, weaknesses, trying to compare what the production was in college or internationally to what the NBA level will be. Again, all of these things have their pros and cons, plus and minuses. No, none of them are perfect. I'm a Tankathon guy. So I'm looking at tankathon.com's mock draft, and they currently have the Grizzlies taking Bilal Coulibaly, and I hope I pronounced that right. I did a little bit of research before the episode. Bilal Coulibaly, who is the teammate, ironically enough, of Victor Wembanyama, who is going to be the first-round pick. Wemby is going to San Antonio. He's going to be a San Antonio Spurs. Hooray, right? Super excited about that. Going to go great, I'm sure, for the Memphis Grizzlies, having that top prospect since LeBron James in the Southwest Division and dealing with him several times a year, every year for the foreseeable future. But I digress. At 25, Bilal Coulibaly is the current selection from Tankathon for the Grizzlies. And there are pros and cons to this. This is a 6'6" player with a 7'3" wingspan. He should project to be a good defender in the NBA. Will he be as good as Dillon Brooks? Maybe, maybe not. We know Dillon Brooks is a very good NBA defender, but Coulibaly has better athleticism. He has a better profile, that 7'3" wingspan on a 6'6" body. He looks the part. And if you watch his highlights, he has an offensive game that is developing. There is potential there, and he's only going to be 19 years old when the season begins. These are all positive arguments for taking another wing similar to Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, Zaire Williams. They all, again, different strengths, different weaknesses, but you have multiple internal development cogs that could be your guy that is the starter replacing Dillon Brooks. And another argument for keeping that number 25 pick and focusing it on a Coulibaly or a Colby Jones from Xavier or a Maxwell Lewis from Pepperdine, somebody of that ilk, is cost control, right? That's one of the beautiful things about the Desmond Bane contract. In my opinion, he's the most bang for your buck player in the entire NBA. That's going to change next season when he gets his raise, but he's going into the fourth year of his rookie contract, the final year of his rookie contract, which means as the 30th pick overall in that 2020 NBA draft, you are looking at Bane on an extremely low number compared to what his production is, right? It is in the single digits of millions, whereas he is going to jump up into, making 30 or so million a year, more than likely, coming in his next contract. So a massive raise is in store for Desmond Bane. But the beauty of the rookie deal and why, regardless of the professional sport, to be honest with you, the NFL, its quarterbacks, the NBA, its overall, as the salary cap evolves and changes with the new CBA, is if you can get an impact player, right? If you can get somebody, especially late in the draft, like the Grizzlies have been able to do with Desmond Bane, Brandon Clark, that is on that more cost-controlled number for 4 years, 2 years guaranteed, and then 2 years of team options, that gives you so much more cap flexibility. And it allows for Memphis to kick the can down the road in terms of what they want to do roster building wise. If they want to make a trade involving wings, Tyus Jones, if they want to continue to look ahead and make a trade maybe later in the summer and use their 2024, 2025, 2026 draft assets plus Tyus as opposed to number 25. If there's somebody that they fall in love with through the draft process, and obviously the draft combine just recently concluded, maybe that's the way to move. Because again, Jake LaRavia has a sweet shooting stroke, as DeMichael has talked about on this show numerous times. We are both, DeMichael and I, fans of Zaire Williams, even with his struggles. We have to keep in mind that he was the player that they were depending on going into the season. He looked primed to be the sixth man and the eventual Dillon Brooks replacement. Is a healthy Zaire Williams able to do that? David Roddy had a strong season. Maybe not elite, maybe not very good, but he showed signs of growth. And all of those players are under cost-effective numbers, not just this coming season, but in the future as well. And that would be true if they took a Bilal Coulibaly or someone like that, 6'6", 6'7", similar build to Dylan, maybe just an upgrade physically, skill set wise, offensively, as a creator, facilitator, mover of the ball, there's arguments to keep number 25. And that is what I wanted to start the episode off with. Again, if you're talking roster construction, you're about to pay a lot of dudes. It enables you to keep that flexibility going into a new CBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, I am going to make the opposite argument. I'm going to argue for why, if the Grizzlies pick number 25 overall, you should be disappointed because it's a massive mistake. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a ton of fun. If you've never done it, I highly recommend that you give it a shot. And PrizePicks is something that is really just easy to do. And I think that when you are dipping your toe into the world of daily fantasy sports, easy is a nice way to go about your business, right? It's really nice. And the $1 million daily Superflex promotion that they continue to do as the NBA Finals approach, 6 correct picks, $1 million, 5 correct picks, $80,000, 4 correct picks, $16,000. You can go check out all the details for that over at prizepicks.com/million. But you got to opt in via that link. That's extremely important. One PrizePicks user gets a chance at becoming a millionaire. And you do it through scoring more than or less than, getting more or less rebounds. The projections are what you're competing with, not individuals. And you can win up to 25 times your money on any given entry with the NBA, Major League Baseball, and all the other sports going on right now. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign-up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We are talking the case against using the draft pick to actually draft another young basketball player. Next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax of Bluff City Media. I am the head of Grizzlies content over at Bluff City Media right now. Check us out at bluffcitymedia.co/join. Become an annual subscriber. Use the promo code Mullinax. 10% off that annual subscription after a 10-day free trial. Plenty of great draft coverage. Lots of wonderful writing going on over there. Lots of great videos. Anthony Sane has joined Bluff City Media, and his latest show was fantastic, talking about the Ja Morant drama. I'm going to do my best, besides that statement, to not talk about the Ja Morant drama on this episode, but I'll let Sane and the others over at Bluff City Media do that. So again, go check out Bluff City Media. That's who I work for, my wonderful partner, in addition to Locked On Grizzlies, my wonderful partner, DeMichael Cole, not with me on this episode. He will rejoin us tomorrow. He is the Grizzlies beat writer for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. So between DeMichael and I, you've come to the right place when it comes to Grizzlies content, hopefully starting your day each and every day with DeMichael and I here at Locked On Grizzlies. Earlier, I made the argument for keeping the pick, and I do think you can logically argue for that. The Bilal Coulibaly player is an interesting one because of his wingspan, the defensive prowess, how he has shown growth in his game, and because of his youth. But the time for youth is over, right? And I think that those of you that stuck it out through that first segment, I think, we have a lot of respectful listeners here at Locked On Grizzlies. And you thought to yourself, yeah, I'm going to hear him out and he makes fair points. I'm tired of dealing with the young dudes, though, Joe. I'm tired of it. That's probably what you're thinking. And I think you might be right. I, too, am kind of tired of dealing with the young guys, not necessarily because it's bad for roster building, but because the Grizzlies are no longer in a rebuild, right? And I have made that point, shouted it from the rooftops the last 4 years, because people get angry and frustrated with where the Memphis Grizzlies are at. How come they're not better? They should be further along. This is the first time that they've regressed. They didn't make the Western Conference Finals. And all I've said, and Chris Harrington, the Daily Memphian, has said, and DeMichael has said it, up and down the list of folks that cover this team, progress is not always linear. But people still want it to be linear, right? And for the first time, the franchise in the Ja Morant era, namely in large part because of Ja Morant, is facing some adversity. And I am not sure that bringing another young piece in to be a key contributor, again, the two-way contracts like we talked about in the earlier part of the show. That's different. Those are guys that will, spend half the year with the team and the other half they're in South Haven with the G League Memphis Hustle. Cool. Those guys can develop and get all the reps they want down there. That's fantastic. They're break in case of emergency glass players. I am looking for a replacement for Dillon Brooks. And I am not as confident at this stage of the offseason that the Dillon Brooks replacement, as of now, is on the roster. All of the players have potential that we mentioned earlier in the show. David Roddy, Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia. We didn't mention Luke Kennard earlier, but if you want to go all in on offense, Kennard makes sense. If you assume a Ja Morant suspension, Desmond Bane as the starting point guard in air quotes, sharing it with Luke Kennard in the backcourt, there was lots of evidence statistically that was a strong duo. So, sure, it's possible to endure, but this team, perhaps, this team, more than any other in the NBA, in my opinion, is screaming for change. Screaming for change. They need a shakeup. Doesn't have to be a massive shakeup. I think that they have their core, Ja Morant, despite the suspension that's coming. That doesn't matter. As a basketball player, do I want him to get suspended and do the things he's doing? No, I don't want him to do that. But he's still going to be employed by the Memphis Grizzlies after 16, 20, 25, whatever the suspension length is. He's going to come back and he's going to play. He's paid a lot of money to do so. Desmond Bane's about to be paid a lot of money to do so. Jaren Jackson Jr. paid a lot of money to do so. That is your core for the next several years, if not longer. What you put around that is the question. And do you double down on depth, as DeMichael and I have talked about before? Do you go all in on a star? That is another question that is for another episode of Locked On Grizzlies where we take a different spin because we already kind of talked about that, right? I think that if you're going to do it, you go for the star. You go for an OG Anunoby. If for whatever reason Mikal Bridges is available, I don't think he is, and I don't know if he is available. Memphis has what it takes to get him now that Portland has the number 3 pick. If the Trailblazers want to keep Dame and try to rebuild a contending team, hello, it's right there, right? There's an opportunity for them. Memphis can't match that in terms of what they have value-wise unless they include Desmond Bane, and they're not going to include Desmond Bane because that would defeat the purpose of the whole exercise. But OG Anunoby? Maybe, right? OG Anunoby for the 2025 pick and a couple other firsts? And Tyus Jones? Would Toronto listen to that deal if Fred VanVleet is going to walk? I think they would. I think they would seriously consider it. And if they're willing to seriously consider it, then you have to consider it as the Memphis Grizzlies because OG Anunoby becomes a core piece. You assume that you're able to re-sign him. You assume that you're able to bring him back. And the Grizzlies have pretty good track records with that, right? When they trade for somebody or when they draft somebody, a lot of times they re-sign in Memphis. It is more rare that they leave after that than them deciding to stay. The issue is initial free agency when they have a massive market to choose from. So trading that much for OG Anunoby doesn't scare me because I believe in the franchise's ability to say, okay, look at what we're doing here, OG. Look at what we're doing here, Mr. Anunoby, whatever he wants to go by. Look at this roster that we built. Look at the culture we're building. Help us make it better. And that ownership that he's going to be able to take will lead to him saying, you know what, I will sign a 4-year, $100+ million extension to be with the Grizzlies. And now you're talking, instead of a Ja, Bane, Jaren core, you've got a Ja, Bane, Jaren, OG, Anunoby core. Sign me up for that. I don't know about you, but I like that idea. And that you, given the trade I just gave you, who's still on the roster? Luke Kennard. Who's still on the roster? Zaire Williams. Jake LaRavia, David Roddy. The only piece that got sent out is Tyus Jones. And you still have a mid-level exception to use. So if you decide to waive a Kenneth Lofton Jr. or do some sort of other trade to open up a roster spot, whatever you decide to do, you can use that mid-level exception. And in this scenario, you don't even have to do that because you're replacing a player with a player, right? You're replacing a player with a player. You have Tyus going out, OG Anunoby coming in. So you still have the mid-level exception to go get a Bruce Brown, to go get a guard that you think is capable of handling that combo guard role. So it's not somebody like Tyus who doesn't play as well next to John Morant because they're both true point guards. It's time to shake things up a bit. That would be the argument for trading the number 25 pick. I'm interested to see what DeMichael thinks on that. That might be a good way to lead off our episode. Obviously, I talked a lot about it just now, so maybe we won't spend a whole show on that, but I do want to kind of get his feel for where he sees the Grizzlies. I think I know what he's going to say, but we'll see what DeMichael has to say the next time we're together here on Locked On Grizzlies. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will do a brief overview of other prospects. I mentioned Bilal Coulibaly, Victor Wembanyama's teammate, some other names, not just his and OG Anunoby's, that would potentially make sense in dealings around the number 25 pick, whether it is selected or traded. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. DeMichael Cole, the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, will join me tomorrow and will join us tomorrow. So hopefully you'll be there with us as we, again, I'll get his take on this and we'll expand a little bit and look at what Memphis is going to do, not just in terms of the draft in particular, but free agency. It's a long offseason, right? We got plenty of time to dive deep into these topics. This is more of a generic overview conversation. And I think in subsequent episodes in the future, we'll take a look at specific guys and maybe do 3 an episode and for about 10 minutes or so, break down skills, things we like, things we don't like. We can do that for free agency and the mid-level exception. We can also do that for the NBA draft. Today, I'm going to do it 2 ways. I'm going to do it for free agency, and I'm going to do it for the draft in case Memphis does decide to keep the pick. Over at Bluff City Media, Chip Williams is one of our terrific writers, and he is a big fan. He's our NBA draft guru over there. He loves Kobe Buffkin. I, too, enjoy Kobe Buffkin, not because he's a wing, because he's not. He is 6'4", 175 pounds. He is a combo guard, and I like combo guards because he is a guy who has the physical capacity to be able to make the three-point shot it well in college, about 36%, a little less than 36%. And again, this is all from tankathon.com. He is a player who is able to dish the rock nicely. If you're moving on from Tyus Jones, for example, in another trade, you didn't have to include number 25, but this is a young man who has a strong assist to usage ratio, a very good assist percentage. He shows strength defensively, and he's still young. By the time he's drafted, he'll be a few months away from his 20th birthday. So there's still opportunity for development with him. I like the way that he plays the game. He's very smooth, very fluid. Again, he makes good decisions with the basketball. He seems more mature for his age as a player. Obviously, you get to know them a little bit more. You listen to interviews, see how the Grizzlies hold their workouts, getting closer to the draft. But I like Kobe Buffkin. I think that's a name to keep an eye on if Memphis stays at 25. I don't know that it makes a ton of sense for them to do that, but I do think that there is opportunity for them to do something along those lines. And if they do, it doesn't need to be a wing. Because again, you got Jake LaRavia, you got David Roddy, you've got Luke Kennard, you've got Zaire Williams, you've got guys on the roster. If you bring in another wing via the draft that is like that, what does that say about those 3 young ones in particular? Luke Kennard is an elite three-point shooter with flaws elsewhere in his game. You know what you got in Luke Kennard. But if you decide to bring in a Coulibaly, what does that say about Zaire Williams and David Roddy and Jake LaRavia? If they're not ready for the show and you think another young wing might do it, that's a shock to the system in and of itself. And maybe an indictment on some of the guys you've drafted in the last couple of years. So I think taking a combo guard makes a lot of sense. And I like Kobe Buffkin. That's one of my top picks out of Michigan, young player there that could be a really good fit. Colby Jones is another one. Not quite a combo guard, but he is a little bit bigger at 6'6" out of Xavier. And he is another assist to turnover ratio guy, can play a bigger point guard, maybe in spurts. He's not a traditional point guard in that sense. And he's certainly not someone that you want at the free throw line. He struggled in that way. So because of his free throw line struggles, the way that he shot the three ball, he was about at 38% in college. That feels unlikely. And that's not a strength in his game. He only took over a little over 3 a game while he was at Xavier in 34 minutes played. That's pretty low. But again, his ability to create offense, move the basketball, facilitate, I think that is something that is worth keeping an eye on. All right. So Colby Jones out of Xavier. We mentioned Kobe Buffkin. I think they go with a combo guard type who can play next to John Morant, help facilitate offense. That would be the draft pick I would make if I'm picking at 25. If I'm not picking at 25, let's say I trade OG Anunoby or trade for OG Anunoby, or I trade for another anymore, and I still need to replace Tyus Jones, right? What would I do? I think that you could look to a Kobe White, who I've talked about here on Locked On Grizzlies in the past. Good three-point shooter out of Chicago, the Chicago Bulls. He's going to be a restricted free agent. I don't know that you want to spend the entire mid-level exception on Kobe White, but I do think that if you're in a spot where you want to make an offer perhaps around $8 to $9 million a year, I don't know that Chicago matches that. And that would be worth it, in my opinion. I think that's a good use of that money. And again, you're not using all of the money. Maybe you can throw a little bit more in there for your second round picks in those two-way deals. I do think that there is something to be said for addressing the combo guard through the mid-level exception. That matters to me because I think that that's what you need. If you're spending so much money on John Morant, understandably so, you need a guy that can play next to John Morant in that spot. So I am in favor of a Kobe White kind of arrival for the Memphis Grizzlies. And other guys, Dennis Schroeder is going to be a free agent, but he's undersized. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. Dante DiVincenzo is probably not going to come back to Golden State. Is that a guy that you really want to be in a position to be a pseudo combo guard? He's a good complementary piece. What does he do beyond that? Trey Jones, ironically, is going to be a restricted free agent for San Antonio. Probably not wise to replace the brother with the little brother. Again, you want somebody that has the capacity, like an Ayo Dosunmu, right, out of Chicago. Big guard, combo potential, good defender. That's what you're looking for. Kobe White, same time of idea. Those are the guys that I would keep an eye on. I'm optimistic that one of those two Chicago guards, again, probably wouldn't cost you the full mid-level exception, but would put you in a position to be stronger. Not necessarily better than Tyus Jones, but better in the sense of fit. They can play alongside a John Morant, and you don't have to worry as much about how you're going to finagle the roster. You can't have $45 million tied up in two dudes at the point guard position that can't play together or can't consistently play together. You can't have a $14 million insurance policy. Those days are gone, even with the suspension. Tyus Jones is not going to help you win a playoff series unless John Morant's not there. And if John Morant's not there, then what's the freaking point? Right? What's the point? You need John Morant there in order to have a realistic shot to compete. So thank you, Tyus, as we talked about earlier on a recent episode of Locked On Grizzlies, for your service. But you're the guy that needs to be shipped. Doesn't mean that they don't need to replace him. Kennedy Chandler's not there anymore. They have to have some sort of combo guard in his place. But whether it's through the draft or whether it's through the mid-level exception, assuming the Tyus gets traded for an OG Anunoby replacing Dylan type, say Memphis holds on to pick number 25 somehow and trades other assets. They need to get a combo guard, somebody that they believe in, hopefully an older one. Again, going back to what we were talking about in terms of experience, an older guard who is able to go in and compete now. They don't have to wait for them to be a good player. Somebody of the Brandon Clark ilk who is physically capable. Colby Jones would be a good example. Colby Jones will be 21 years old by the time the season comes around. I'm starting to talk myself into Colby Jones. That's an older rookie. It's a guy who physically handle the job as a combo guard, a bigger 6'6" type of player. Marcus Sasser, undersized, kind of nervous about that, but you want to talk about a veteran type of guy out of Houston? 22, going to be 23 almost by the time the season gets started. Makes sense to me. If you're going to keep the draft pick, it needs to be somebody that is older. It needs to be somebody who is prepared to bear the brunt. It can't be a true rookie. It can't be somebody like, again, Bilal Coulibaly scares me. I know he's a wing, but he's going to be 19 years old. You need someone that can come in and be a contributor, not a starter necessarily, not a superstar, of course, at the 25th pick. It's unlikely you're going to find that. You want a contributor. And I think you're more likely with Jones or Bufkin to get that as opposed to a Coulibaly. And again, you're more likely to get that as a process to acquire a veteran player than you are in the draft. So it'll be interesting to see how the Grizzlies play it out. And I'm interested, like I said, to hear how DeMichael sees all of this playing out himself the next time that we're together here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for listening, watching, however you're taking in Locked On Grizzlies on YouTube. If you are listening, wherever you get your podcast, liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing, it's all good. And again, thank you so much for making us a podcast that's part of the Locked On Podcast Network with over 2,000 subscribers. Very exciting times for us here at Locked On Grizzlies, DeMichael and I. Very grateful for all of you that make us a part of your show, of your Grizzlies content experience each and every day. Please continue to do so as the offseason grinds forth. DeMichael will be back with me tomorrow. We will talk a little bit about this, probably at the start of the show, get his takeaway on how he perceives that 25th overall pick. Maybe we check in on the conference finals, talk a little bit more about how Denver one win away from going up on the Lakers, how that all played out, right? Because they play tonight. So what that will look like for the Western Conference heading into the NBA Finals, the Denver sweep Los Angeles. What can the Grizzlies take away from that? That might be another thing to talk about. Even if the Lakers survive in Game 4, how that process impacts Memphis. Those are all things that we could discuss on our next episode. Until then, stay locked in. I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your Monday. This is Locked On Grizzlies.